Welcome to the latest episode of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. My name is Hunter Baumgardt, your host. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HunterBOnAir. You can also feel free to like the Facebook page, Hunter Baumgardt Sports. Remember, you can also watch or listen to the podcast. You can watch on YouTube or listen on SoundCloud. Simply search Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. Well, today we are talking Packers football. We are less than 3 weeks away from the Packers-Vikings opener at US Bank Stadium on September 13th. Of course, the Vikings and the Packers won't have fans at that game because the US Bank Stadium and the Vikings organization announced they will not be having fans there this week. But will still be played, and we're excited for it. So let's talk some Packers football with Andy Herman. He is the owner of the Pack-A-Day podcast. He's been at training camp. He's been covering the team, and so let's get some inside knowledge, right? We're going to talk to him about a bunch of different things. The new Kenny Clark contract. Who has impressed him the most at training camp? How is Aaron Rodgers looking at training camp? A bunch of different issues and a bunch of different topics we're going to cover with Andy Herman. I'm excited for it. So let's talk some Packers football with Andy. Joining me on the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast this week is Andy Herman. He is the owner of the Pack-A-Day podcast, as well as a writer and reporter for the Packer Report, and an analyst for Green Bay Nation and the Pro Football Network. You can find him on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL, and wanted to talk a bunch of Packers topics today. And Andy, really appreciate the time this afternoon.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Very excited to be talking to you, Hunter. I appreciate you taking the time as well, and should be some good conversation today.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it, and just excited to kind of pick your brain on the Green Bay Packers as we near the start of the season. It gets closer every day. I know you've been at training camp the last couple of weeks, and what has that been like, without fans there, but also what has that been like as a media member? Is it a lot different as far as protocols for media members because we're in a pandemic?
Yeah, great question. So it's been a little bit surreal. So for those who maybe don't know, this is my first time actually ever being credentialed from a practice standpoint. So my first credential actually came last year, basically week 2, I think it was, for the last season in the regular season. So training camp and everything had been done at that point. So this is my first time ever being credentialed for practices. So I don't know a ton better, I guess, which has actually been kind of helpful. But it was a little bit surreal to be credentialed for the first time and basically be standing in the exact same spot that I was as a fan for the last however many years in the stands, just with a lot less people around. So that was a little bit interesting. As far as protocols go, they have a group of media members who are, I think it's tier 2 credentialed members, where I believe, and don't quote me on this, I'm obviously not one of those people, so I can't state the protocols verbatim, but I believe they're getting tested daily and going through a lot more rigorous, protocols and testing and things like that. They're allowed, I think, a little bit closer on the field and things like that. So there's that group of people. And then there's the majority of the media that is just kind of let in the stands, nowhere near the players. And, basically our only requirements are that we wear a mask and we stay socially distanced from one another. So it's been great because there's tons of space there. There's no reason for anyone really to be close to one another. Everyone's wearing masks. So there's no kind of threat in that regards. And certainly we're not by the players in any capacity or really anyone involved in the Packers organization. So it's worked out well. It's been a little bit surreal going, just the process in general and not having fans in any capacity. Watching a Packers practice at Lambeau Field with no stands there is a little bit eerie and I guess unique to say the least. But yeah, overall it's been good and it's been exciting to be there and just have some form of, at least for me, normalcy of being able to watch the Packers during this time, which I would have been doing in years past.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm curious for the Lambeau Field, because they've had some practices there at Lambeau Field. And obviously that's not a regular occurrence in a normal year. And I know you've been at a couple of those practices. Has that changed the mood of the practice at all, in your opinion, as for the players and coaches, or is it kind of just another practice and just another football field?
Yeah, I think they try to hype up the team activities while they're at Lambeau just a little bit. But, to be totally fair, I think Matt LaFleur and staff does a fantastic job of really trying to make energy, really stand out throughout the entirety of all of their practices. So I think that's something that they really focus on. So while it's definitely been good energy at Lambeau, I don't know that it's a ton different from what we see at Ray Nitschke Field either. But you can tell there's a little bit more competitive activities and things like that where they're trying to, make that atmosphere as real as possible to what they will see, come those first couple of games when there's no fans in the stands.
And so moving on to some other topics here, of course, Kenny Clark was just given a big contract, and that's kind of been a storyline during training camp here. I'm curious, first of all, what do you think of the contract? And then more specifically, what does this mean for the cap space that the Packers will have coming up in the next 4 years to sign other free agents?
Yeah, I think Clark's deal was done in a really smart way that gives them flexibility. Continues to give them flexibility this year. Actually, saved $1 million this year on the cap hit. Next year is very, very team friendly and not going to affect them when there's that potential hit to the salary cap. And then looking seasons ahead in year 3 and 4 of that deal is when you start to see the prices go up, and that's really based around when they're expecting more media revenue and things hopefully to be back to normal. And you're still paying him when he's in the prime of his career. So this was a really well done deal by Russ Ball and the Packers organization, and it really works around when they're going to have money and when they're going to need to save money and things like that. So and again, it's a lot easier to backload contracts when it's a player who has been nothing but the consummate professional and continues to improve year in and year out, and is still going to be in his 20s when that deal is backloaded, and not paying somebody 20-30 million when they're 36 and past their prime. So this was a well put together deal.
That's good to hear. And as far as and like you said, it's team friendly, especially the first couple of years. I'm curious because this has kind of been a talk of the town, if you will, for the last couple of days. Is okay. Looks like the bigger hit comes in 2022 when you go up to about $20 million. What does that mean for Aaron Rodgers' future with the Packers? Does this mean they would try to unload Aaron Rodgers before 2022? Is that would that be almost like a deadline in your mind, or do you think, okay, that doesn't have as much of an impact as maybe we think?
I think 2022 is going to be a deadline for Aaron Rodgers in some capacity. And what I mean by that is it's going to be a year where something happens. And what I mean is it's either going to be a contract restructure and they extend him out and just, move some of that money down the line. It's going to be, or, vice versa. It's going to be some sort of move where that's the time where they decide to move on from him. They're not going to, I would be surprised if they played him in 2022 on his current deal. And that potentially goes for Aaron Rodgers as well, who could be due for, additional money and increases at that time, dependent upon how he's playing. I think the big thing to remember this offseason is regardless of Jordan Love, regardless of Kenny Clark's contract, regardless of what's going to happen a couple years from now, I still think Aaron Rodgers' destiny lies within the hands of Aaron Rodgers. And if he's playing well, and if he's playing at a high level, I think it's going to be really difficult to move on. Now, that gets a little bit convoluted and cloudy if Jordan Love is also fantastic and he's looking great. I think if that happens 2 years from now, then yes, you have to look at the potential, cap savings of going from Rodgers to Love and saying, hey, if we're apples to apples here and we think we can win just as much or close enough with Jordan Love as we would with Aaron Rodgers, the cap savings and starting that new clock with a future quarterback who could be here for another decade, yes, it clouds that a little bit. But I think for the most part, it's going to be in Aaron's hands. And I think over the course of that time frame, these next 2 years, he's going to show whether or not this is, going to be maybe his last couple of years in Green Bay, or whether he's earned that extension and that additional time. And I think only time will tell, but I don't think Kenny's contract is going to have really anything to do with that timeline.
Andy Herman joining us on the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. He's the owner of the Pack a Day podcast and a writer and reporter for Packers Report, and of course an analyst for Green Bay Nation and Pro Football Network. You can find him on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Continuing on the Rodgers situation, specifically something he said this week, and that was he went back to his 2010 tape and found something that he was doing back then that he implemented over the last week of practice or so and has already seen results. Did he give us any clue to what that was, or did he kind of keep that close to the vest?
He kept it close to the vest. I don't think anyone has a great idea of exactly what that was, but I think it's probably something that is a very small nuance to what he does. The way that he plants his foot, the way that he gets back on his final step, a small tweak in his throwing motion, a small tweak of how he's stepping up in the pocket. It's something that to the naked eye would be almost unrecognizable. but something that was a small tweak that he noticed that, he wanted to do a little bit different. And yes, through those 3 days, I think he's looked really good. Towards the end of team period yesterday at Lambeau Field, I thought, it was interesting because both he and Boyle were basically on fire through the course of the last few days and really that entire practice. And then in the last team periods, both Rodgers and Boyle struggled a little bit. I think you would have heard about how great Boyle and Rodgers had looked yesterday had it not been for kind of that last period where they both kind of faltered a little bit. But Rodgers looked really good the 2 days prior and really good up until that final session, which was a 2-minute, session. And, sometimes the defense is going to win too. And I wouldn't, put any major credence to any of, or like he had a bad day or anything like that. But I think overall, he's looked a little bit more confident throwing the ball. He's been slinging it around. Matt LaFleur made mention of that as well in his press conference. But as far as that exact, detail, he's played it close to the vest, and I don't think anyone's necessarily going to find exactly what that one thing is. But I'm happy he found something, and it certainly seems to be affecting him in a positive way since then.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've heard this from other reporters too, that Aaron Rodgers is looking pretty good in training camp. What have you noticed about him that makes him, because, last year he, to the naked eye, he wasn't as good as he was in years past. And it's just kind of like the truth of what people were watching, and people, maybe Packers fans were scared of this, he's going downhill, whatever it may be. It would be awesome, I think, as Packers fans. We'd love it if Aaron Rodgers could go back to what he was, exactly what it was in 2010 or in something like that. But what have you noticed about Aaron Rodgers that has made him, you said you had confidence, and what else?
Yeah, so this could probably be about a 3-hour session just in and of itself, because the topic is super complex.
Okay.
Ben Fennell and I just on the podcast had some conversation on this as well. I know him and I are kind of on the same page in this. The one thing I'll semi-disagree with is I don't think this was a last year thing. I think this has been the last 3-ish years thing with Aaron, where there's a difference. And it's really, I can't tell you, as somebody who watches every play over and over on the All-22 and tries to gauge, who's playing well and who's not, and assign grades to that, it is insanely hard to grade Aaron Rodgers. And what I mean by that is any grade, for the most part, from what I've seen, and certainly my own grading system, you're gonna give high positive points to big explosive plays, and you're going to give major negative points to turnovers and really poor decisions and bad throws, maybe missing somebody wildly inaccurately or things like that. The thing with Aaron is that we know he doesn't turn the ball over or have any major negative plays. You'll see them from time to time. He'll take a sack from time to time, but really he avoids those major negative grades, and which is why you see Pro Football Focus and myself continue to have very, very positive grades on him, is because there's nothing that you can look at his resume and to be like, all right, this is brutal. This is brutal. He doesn't make those type of plays. On the flip side, you will still see him from time to time make some very explosive, very impressive plays that nobody else on the planet Earth, save for maybe a Pat Mahomes, is making out on the football field. So he's getting very high grades for those type of plays. And the rest of the game is mostly status quo, small negative, small positive here and there. And when you look at the total picture, you end up with these big explosive positive plays, almost no negative plays, and most of the stuff is in the middle. And it looks like this great positive because the positives far outweigh the negatives. The truth of the matter is somewhere in the middle. And what I mean by that is, and Ben Fennell actually puts this best, you can't always grade the throws that he doesn't make. And there's so many plays that you will see that he just kind of eats the football, throws the ball away, where, again, it's not a major negative when you're putting it in the score sheet, but there were plays that were out there out on the field that a player of Aaron Rodgers' caliber can take advantage of, and he's not. And there are plays that I truly believe he took advantage of earlier in his career and doesn't do so with the same efficiency and with the same effectiveness as he did, again, earlier in his career. And I think a big part of that has been his hesitancy to really throw in the middle of the field. But even that you have to really weigh, because the number one thing that is going to swing a football game is turnovers. And the dude is the most turnover-averse player in the history of the NFL, which he deserves some level of credit for. Ben on the podcast this week said he would love to see Aaron Rodgers throw 10 to 12 interceptions this year and just sling it a little bit. And I'm of kind of the same feeling of he has really probably the rest of his career to be as cautious as he wants. I truly believe that at some point he'll look back at his career and wish that he just didn't sling it a little, at least in 1 year. Just get a little bit of Brett Favre in you. Just sling the football around the field, because he's so insanely accurate that look at his free plays, right? When he feels like he has carte blanche and he can throw anywhere around the field, he is an assassin. He is putting the ball where only the receiver can get it. It's not like he's creating a bunch of turnovers. Every once in a while, he'll just throw one up because he knows it's a free play. But for the most part, he's just putting it on players and letting them go make a play. And that's what I would like to see a little bit more of, a little bit less cautiousness. And again, this is something we could talk about for, again, a very long time and still not pinpoint the exact reason as to why. But I think this has been something that's been going on for the last 3 years. And I would love the fact if he found something in 2010 that brought back some of that confidence and the ability to maybe just sling the ball around the field a little bit more.
And you're starting to see that in training camp. Basically, you're saying you're seeing a little more confidence, a little more slinging it around than you had.
Well, I think the tough thing with Aaron, if you remember back, even last couple of years, this is a little bit common for him. Every year it seems like there's this conversation of, is Aaron throwing too many interceptions in training camp? And no,
that's true.
He's letting things fly a little bit more, testing things out. A great example of this is the last play of camp about a week and a half ago, or the last play of practice.
Sure.
They're in team activities. And basically, so what'll happen is if a player gets through for a quote unquote sack, they'll just let the play continue out. The player will stop and they'll let the play continue as if Rodgers bought time. They're not just going to stop it. They're going to kind of let things progress out. So on this specific play, Rodgers was immediately pressured in what would have been a sack on the play. They let it play out. It was basically the last play of practice. He flings the ball all the way across his body. Josh Jackson's right there. Should have had an interception. He dropped it. There was no chance of it getting to the receiver. It was just Rodgers basically saying, you know what, I'm just going to throw a ball. The play would have been over anyway. It's the last play of practice. Why not just, give somebody a chance? Would he have ever thrown that ball in a game? 0% chance. I mean, there's no way he ever throws that ball in a game, even if it was a live play and even if he wasn't sacked. That's just not the way that he plays. So I think you see him testing things out a little bit, but I've seen that from him the last few training camps. So I can't say with any authority, yep, all right, he's going to be out there gunslinging. I don't think that's going to be the case. I can't even make an argument that necessarily 100% should be the case because of how important ball security is. But it'll be interesting to see how he kind of plays week one and if some of these changes kind of take hold.
Andy Herman joining us here on the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Now, I've heard some things in the last week or two, I guess now, about the reporters not being able to say as much as you could before. And the Green Bay Packers organization making kind of that rule the last couple of weeks. What changes have the Packers organization made, and how does that affect what you as reporters can tell us fans about what's going on at training camp?
Yeah, so I'll kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth a little bit here, so
sure.
I apologize for that in advance. So the first is I don't put any blame on the Packers because I believe that this should be something that was mandated by the NFL of, all reporters at all teams are going to be able to report this type of stuff because otherwise, again, of course, it's to the team's benefit to shut it down as much as possible and not let some of that get out. But honestly, this is not me speaking. I'm a fan first. All right. So yes, I have a credential, but I'm a fan first. This is not me speaking as a media personality. Just straight up as a fan, I think it does a disservice to the NFL if, fans can't get this level of content simply because of a pandemic and they can't be in the stadium and, seeing some of this stuff for themselves. I think it behooves the NFL to allow this information out so that you can continually have this thirst from the fans of wanting this information. And I think it does the fans a little bit of a disservice that they can't get this information. But if you leave it in the team's hands and some teams are doing one thing and other teams are not, I think you do get some level of competitive advantage by shutting that down. And I tend to agree with the Packers' decision because of that, of saying, you know what, we need to calm some of this down. Do I agree with the decision overall? No, I would love for it to be reported in, again, for every team across the league. But if it's not, I understand the Packers' decision. So I think that's the first thing. Now, the flip side is if I'm being totally transparent, it hasn't been that big of a deal. And I think a little bit bigger of a deal has been made out of it than maybe need be. We can report on who's playing well, who's doing what. We can't specifically say who's lined up or who's playing with first team, second team, third team, but you can glean a lot of that by, if Tim Boyle threw a pass to Reggie Begelton and Aaron Rodgers threw a pass to Devontae Adams, like you can inherently glean some of that information, just from, reading, and they're cool with that. We can report who threw to who and the plays that happened on the field. So I've been able to do a full play-by-play of what's been happening. Would I've liked to have talked a little bit more about a couple of topics and go into it in much more detail because it's really interesting and fans would really love it? Yes, I would. And I think fans have been, left out of that, unfortunately, which is a bummer. The only other thing that I'll say in regards to it is I think in a way it makes reporters think a little bit before they start reporting in a bad way. Like I want to be able to just send the content and let you guys decipher the information. I don't want to have to think while I'm going, all right, can I tweet this? Can I not tweet this? Can I report this? I was on a radio hit the other day trying to talk about Tyler Ervin without breaking team protocols and me trying to sidestep and think about it rather than just talk, coherently and fluently about what's going on with Tyler Ervin at practice. That's the hard part of it. But again, I don't put blame on the Packers. I do put some blame on the NFL for just not opening this up and allowing everyone across the league to be able to do their jobs from a media standpoint.
Yeah. As far as, within those rules, let's stick within the rules that you have to follow, but who has impressed you most at training camp? What have you kind of noticed about some of the players that you've been seeing? Because obviously we have no preseason to judge this year at all. It's just, boom, September 13th, here we go. So what's been impressive to you, seeing these players at practice?
Yeah, I'll just kind of go position by position just to maybe make it easier. I think Tim Boyle's had a fantastic camp. I think that's been reported by just about everyone. He's confident. He's slinging the ball around in a good way. He's not taking chances, which has been an issue for him in the past. So I think he's really put together. He looks completely in command at quarterback. And when Brian Gutekunst said they feel like they can win games with Tim Boyle, I believe he's spot on and 100% correct. Running back, I think Jamal Williams, just his route running ability, he looks better out of the backfield as a receiver. He's catching the ball with confidence. I think that's going to help him out quite a bit. At the wide receiver position, I'll probably say that's maybe the position I've been most disappointed with. I know there's been some buzz about EQ. I just haven't seen anything explosive from anyone outside of Devontae. I thought Alan Lazard's had a really nice camp, and I think he's going to stack success from what he did from a season ago. Okay. And I think MBS has had a really nice camp too, but nothing flashy outside of Adams for the most part. I think the tight ends overall as a group look really good. Robert Tonyan's taken a step. I think, DeGuara is going to be able to provide a variety of different roles with what he's capable of. Lewis looks the same. He absolutely depleted Rashawn Gary the other day, which was fun to watch, at least if you're, from an offensive standpoint, maybe not so much for Rashawn Gary in a defensive standpoint. So I think the tight ends have looked good. Lane Taylor's looked really good along the offensive line. He looks like a natural, and he certainly looks like one of the top 5 offensive linemen. Defensive line, I think Kingsley Kiki's put some good plays out there. Willington Prevalon is a player who I didn't expect much from as an undrafted free agent. He got hurt the last practice, so we'll see where he's at. But I thought he's had a fairly nice camp for an undrafted free agent guy. Kamal Martin at inside linebackers looked good. Randy Ramsey has looked really nice at edge rusher. Stanford Samuels as an undrafted free agent looked good at corner. And King and Jair have had really nice camps as well. Good. And then I thought Amos was maybe the best player at camp prior to him leaving for a few days. He's still playing very well. And then I'll go back to linebacker for a second. I feel like Christian Kirksey's really been a really nice addition as well.
Cool. We've got a lot of optimism and a lot of players to be excited about, and some new faces to be excited about, like Kingsley, like you just mentioned. All right. So looking ahead, Andy Herman joining us on the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Last couple questions for you, just regarding the upcoming season. So let's look at, obviously, no fans at Lambeau the first 2 games. A lot of NFL teams are doing that. we've seen that the no fans, they've had some effect, but they haven't had this, dramatic effect. We're kind of almost getting used to it now in the NBA and the MLB. Do you think that kind of will be the case in the NFL too, where it's just an adjustment for the first game or two, and then the players will be like, okay, playing with no fans is not as maybe awful or weird as it may have seemed?
Yeah, I think it'll be weird to begin with, as you mentioned. I think it will be something that they get used to. It's weird being in there even for a practice and seeing an empty stadium and thinking that that's how a game is going to be played.
Yeah.
As somebody who's been sitting in the same section, for my entire life since I was basically 7 years old, even when I got into the stadium and it was empty, it was just disorienting because you're not ever used to seeing it with nobody in. I had to kind of figure out where I was in the stadium.
Yeah.
It was a totally different feel. So I do think it's going to take a little bit of an adjustment. I've said kind of all off season, I'm not sure that there's a team that this benefits more than Green Bay, dependent upon how the decibel levels are for the piped in noise. If Green Bay is able to run, with their offense and not have to do a silent count and things like that, and Aaron Rodgers is able to draw teams offside, both, at home and on the road, I sincerely think that can be something that is of great benefit to the Packers, especially on the road, which is something that they're usually not able to do quite as much of. So I think it could be to the Packers' benefit. I'm not saying I would prefer it that way. I would much prefer the stands were full if everything were normal, but I do think Green Bay could stand to benefit from it.
And then final question for you, Andy Herman joining us. Final question, kind of looking ahead, you've obviously seen this team the last couple of weeks up close and personal at practice. What do you foresee for this season for the Packers as far as a record goes, how this NFC North shakes up, and do they get back to the NFC Championship or maybe even further?
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult to say. I think the thing that's going for them in their favor is, knock on wood, they've been pretty darn healthy so far. I also think in the current state of affairs, the teams that are carrying over a ton of consistency from a season ago, I think are really going to be at an advantage just with the lack of mini camps and OTAs and training camp being less, no preseason. Green Bay carries over their GM, their head coach, their quarterback, their running back, their star receiver, their left tackle, their top edge rushers, their corners. The level of consistency that this team has from a season ago is ridiculous, so I think that stands to benefit, especially early in the season. When you have a matchup against a team like Tampa Bay, who has so many moving parts, quarterback and things like that, and early part of the season, I think Green Bay gets a benefit there. Again, potentially playing a road game where there's not many, many or no, fans in the stadium. They'll open a game against Minnesota with no fans in the stadium. So, and you look at Minnesota's defense. That's a defense that's been entirely in flux this offseason, from opt-outs to players signing elsewhere, all of it. So I do think Green Bay is in a great position. I think they are taking a step within their offense in Matt LaFleur's season 2, and I'm optimistic. I do think that they still need to figure out a way to generate explosive plays. It's something that's been missing for the last couple seasons. It's something that's been frankly missing in training camp. You'll see a couple explosive plays here and there, but it's usually generated off of a defensive, breakdown or play action, and not necessarily a wide receiver or a playmaker going out and making a big play. So I think in order for them to get back to where they were and potentially beyond that, I think they need to get some of that playmaking and some of those explosive plays back.
Andy Herman is joining us, and you can find him on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL, of course, the owner of the Pack-A-Day podcast. Tell us quickly about the Pack-A-Day podcast. Where can people find it, and how can people listen?
Yeah, you can find it wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Obviously Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, etc. You can find it anywhere. New podcast 365 days a year. We've got a team of about 25, 26 people who all do kind of different episodes. My most recent one was on Monday with Ben Fennell. He's going to be joining me every other week, which we're super excited about. So make sure to check it out if you haven't already.
Again, Andy Herman, and you can follow him on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Andy, really appreciate the time this afternoon, and really excited for this Packers season. I might have to talk to you during the season as well.
Yeah, you bet. Anytime, Hunter. I appreciate you taking the time as well.
That is Andy Herman. He is the owner of the Pack-A-Day podcast and a writer and reporter for the Packer Report as well. You can follow him on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. He's also an analyst for Green Bay Nation and the Pro Football Network. And I highly suggest giving him a follow on Twitter. You can keep up with his podcast and all his coverage of being at Packers training camp and some great details about Aaron Rodgers, right? About aspects of his game that can be improved, what can be improved from years past, as well as some different details about the Kenny Clark contract and how that might impact the team going forward. And of course, playing without fans and everything in between. So really enjoyed the discussion with Andy, and I hope you did as well. Again, you can follow him on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Well, thanks so much for watching or listening to the podcast this week. You can watch on YouTube or listen on SoundCloud. Simply search Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. You can feel free to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HunterBeOnAir. I will give all the updates on the podcast there when it's released, maybe a preview of a guest, and all of that can be found on Twitter and Instagram or the Facebook page, Hunter Baumgardt Sports. Again, really appreciate you watching or listening. Go Pack Go, and I'll talk to you next week. And as always, stay positive.